Hey, how we doing? Welcome to Your Successful Retirement. We want to talk today about something a little bit different. Is a lot of times I have a call to action or something you should be watching out for. I want to do more of an observatory podcast today, talking about inflation. And because it's been a hot button for at least 2 years, and it continues to be a hot button with President Trump's tariff stuff and all of that, I think this is something that it's important for us to think about, because we had 20 years that we didn't see any appreciable inflation, and we got really used to that. And it's funny, as I was doing research for this and remembering going back to like the late 80s, early 90s, and we had 20 years of high inflation, and we just got used to it. And you get used to different things, and give you some perspective on kind of what inflation looks like and some things that you may believe that may not be true, and then kind of some causes to this that you haven't really thought about. So what I found interesting, which going back to the 80s, was inflation in the 80s was 4, 5, sometimes 6%. We're not talking early when it was bonkers, 81, 82, 83, but I'm talking 84 to 90. It was not unheard of to have inflation in the 4s, the 5s, the 6s. I remember you could get in a bank savings account, it was 5.25% was the bare minimum you get in interest. Good luck today. Why? Because inflation's been so low, the banks don't pay anything on savings accounts anymore. The inflation goal, I think, for the Fed in the 90s was 4%. We want to keep inflation under 4%. We've been under 4% for like 18 months, almost 2 years now. And the Fed's working hard to get it under 3, preferably under 2. That may be aggressive, but again, I wonder if it's more colored by the last 20 years of almost no inflation, and that colors your strategy and your goals, where versus the Fed in the 90s was dealing with 20 years of high inflation, and 4% seemed reasonable at that time. When we look at inflation, probably the most common way that we express it is the CPI, or Consumer Price Index. And this is a government published number. The Labor Department publishes it, and they publish it monthly. And they use a bunch of different goods. They look at energy. They look at groceries. They look at housing. They look at rent. They look at what's called durable goods, so a washing machine or a television, or they look at automotive, and automotive is separate. They keep automotive separate from the rest of durable goods. And durable goods means goods that last at least a year, or longer than a year, rather. And they track monthly changes. To some extent, they seasonally adjust them, which frustrates me, less so than they do other indexes or indices that the Labor Department tracks, like the unemployment and the employment rate, which comes out once a month as well. They seasonally adjust that, and that drives me bonkers. And they're trying to compare on an ongoing basis. Here's what things used to cost. Here's what they cost now. And that's very easy on a month-to-month, sometimes even a year-to-year basis. Beyond that, it's very difficult. Is one of the things that the Labor Department did back in, I think it was the early 80s, was they changed the way the CPI was calculated, because they were trying to replicate how people were spending their money. And the CPI is what they call a basket of goods. That's what the government calls it, the basket of goods, between your car and the gas in the car and the electricity and the food on your table and the washing machine, and all of that is the basket of goods. But those baskets, they realized by the 80s, change. And they don't just change generationally, they also change based on prices. And their big example was, look, if prices are up, you're not going to buy steak, you're going to buy hamburger. We want to adjust the rate for that. And I remember hearing that in 1987 and scratching my head in 87 thinking, I don't quite understand how you go back from that. So, okay, prices go up and I stop buying steak and I start buying hamburgers. And prices go up more and I stop buying hamburger and I buy turkey burger. And prices go up more and all right, we're living on potatoes, and prices go up more, and now we're living on dirt. There's no discussion of reversing that, except if prices fall. And prices haven't fallen in my lifetime. They haven't fallen since 100 and something years ago, they don't fall. We don't see deflation. Deflation is actually economically horrific. So it's difficult. They're playing games with these numbers. I'm not really crazy about that. The other thing is spending trends change. Think of movies. Think of 10 years ago, go to the movies. Think of 40 years ago, go to the movies. You went to the movies a lot 40 years ago. When I was a kid, you would go to the movies. That was like a big deal. Having movies on TV or cable just wasn't as available as it is now. Is if you just go on basic cable, your basic cable right now, you can watch the litany of Marvel movies at least once over each, and the litany of Star Wars movies at least once over each every single week. They're on one of the channels. It's like when I was a kid, It's a Wonderful Life was on every channel at least once a day from Thanksgiving through New Year's. It was just that ubiquitous. And it's the same way today. But 40 years ago, movies weren't on TV that much. You might get one showing of a movie. So going to the movies was a big deal. Even 10 years ago, the height of the Marvel movies, it was a big deal to go to the movies. I haven't been in the movies in probably at least 5 years. There's no reason to go. I'll wait till it comes out on TV. So that trend changed things. There was one I was reading just over the weekend that Americans are snacking less, and they can't figure it out. Is the like Frito-Lay's profits have dropped over the last year, and and their sales have dropped. And I think I can think of a good reason. Well, when do we eat potato chips and Fritos? I love Fritos. I have them like once a year. But I'm like totally done with them by the end of the bag and don't want to see them again for at least another year. We snack like that. We eat cookies and Chips Ahoy and Fritos and all of that while we're sitting watching TV. Well, now we even watch TV less. We watch it on our phones and our iPads and things like that. We don't watch conventional TV, so we're not sitting around eating these snack things. We're making different choices with our food budget, and that changes over time. So looking at the CPA to try to compare things over time can be difficult. On top of that, and this is the real key, things move at different rates. I found there's this company, Seek Publishing. I don't know what else they do, but one of the things they do is they sell these. I think they sell it to insurance people, and they sell these little booklets that talk about in year whatever, this is what all these things cost. And I happened to find an image online of their 1945, which was 80 years ago. I thought that was perfect. It's 2025 now, 80 years. Let's see what things cost then versus what they cost today. And I just went through some of them. A house cost $4,625 on average in 1945. If I look at the average price based on like Zillow, you're looking at about a 5.5% increase in inflation annually. By the way, CPI, which again, it's hard to judge this over time because habits change, although people always have houses, was about 3.6, 3.7% from 1945 till 2025. So the house grew by 2% more per year over that time period. It's almost double the cost increase, if you can believe it. Income, $2,390, up about 4.4%. Harvard University. This one's going to blow your mind. Harvard University tuition only right now is $60,000 a year, which is actually pretty reasonable compared to a lot of other institutions, undergraduate tuition. A lot of institutions in the area that don't carry the prestige that Harvard does charge about the same. It is shocking that there's not a tier of these super schools over the next level. Not to say the next level, you're in this area, BC, BU, Northeastern, Bentley, places like that is good quality schools. There's not really a difference there. Harvard is about $60,000 in tuition today. In 1945, tuition was $420 a year. And I find that staggering. And that's 6.4%, almost double what the inflation rate has been. Gasoline, about 15 cents. And that's actually about adjusted for inflation, what it's worth today, in the high twos. Gasoline was one of those things I remember back in after the oil embargo in the 70s. My dad was, I'm never buying a gas guzzler again. I've had it until gas goes back to 20 cents a gallon. I'm not buying it. Well, gas was 15 cents in 45, and it was 20 cents in 1968, or something like that. And those things will change over time. But if you look at gasoline, it's not that bad. Hamburger. Now, I assume they mean hamburger, not a hamburger. Because a hamburger in 1945 was actually it was single patty, no cheese, bun, wrapped in wax paper at a diner. Versus today, it's McDonald's, it's Wendy's, it's Burger King, it's Red Robin. How do you compare what a burger is? I assumed it was a pound of hamburger was 35 cents. Now it's about $6. Again, a little bit less than average inflation, about 3% over that time period. But here's the one in 2020, early 2025, that everybody is talking about. People talk about inflation today. When people talked about inflation 2 years ago, there were a lot of different things they were talking about. And 4 years ago, they were talking about, lumber costs and automobiles and things of that nature. Today, it's eggs. Oh my gosh, eggs. Eggs are they're skyrocketing, and they are. In 1945, a dozen eggs cost 22 cents, less than 2 cents an egg, 2 pennies per egg, which I think is awesome. And you look today, let's say the average is $5. I know some people are paying a lot more. I know some people are paying a little bit less, but it seems like the average seems around $5. And that's about 4% inflation, a little bit higher than it was normally. So you go, okay, it's pretty close. But here's the caveat. 2 or 3 years ago, eggs were $1.50 a dozen, if that. I know I've seen within reasonable recent history, $1.20, 10 cents an egg. That works out to about 2.5% inflation. How did it not grow nearly as fast as everything else? And part of that's because if you've ever seen how modern egg production works, it's not pretty. I may have mentioned this before. Mike Rowe did a thing on dirty jobs. He goes into different dirty jobs, and one time he went to a chicken factory that grows eggs. It's depressing and deadly. You're wondering. There's a lot of bird flu over the last year, and I look at one of these compounds, and I think there should be bird flu all the time. All the time. I can't imagine them not losing entire crops of birds to bird flu on a regular basis because they're penned in so much. And that's how we were able to control the cost for so long, as we got more and more efficient. Well, now there's a lot of call for cage-free and things like that. Costs have gone up. Plus, we've had bird flu that have added to the costs, and then it's bumped up there. So we've got a lot of those things that have gone up. But what about have some things gone down in price? This is the one that always gets me. I think things have gone down in price. So I started looking some more, and a television in 1970, I found this online, somewhere on Facebook. A television in 1970 cost $500. And I think about that, and a house was probably worth about $20,000. And I go, wow, that's expensive. And then I decided, I'm like, yeah, it's probably, I don't know, it's a 65-inch TV's got to be $800-900 now. So I went online with Walmart over the weekend, and I went to TVs, and then I clicked, yeah, give me a 65-inch. Decent, huge TV compared to when you were talking in 1970, it's probably a 19-inch thankfully color TV. We didn't have our first color TV until 1976, 77, and it was like a 11-inch that we were in this apartment while we were looking for a house. We had moved back from Cleveland to Massachusetts, and we were looking for a house and living in this apartment complex. If you signed a lease for X number of dollars, they gave you a color TV, which I was so excited. We didn't have a color TV before then. It was 1976, 77. So color TV, $500, 19-inch, 65-inch TV today at Walmart, $300. Technology's better. The TV is bigger, it's lighter, and it's cheaper than it was 55 years ago. How do we equate that? How does that work? If you look at computers, I was watching a blurb from, I think, the Today Show on the computer just recently, and they were talking about computers. Portable computers. They called them portable. I loved that. They were not laptops back then. They were portable. They had to be as thick as a phone book. We're talking like the Boston area Yellow Page phone book. We're not talking, your local your local phone book back in the day. We're talking the big one, the one that when you were a kid, your mother stuck under your butt when you were at the kitchen table because you weren't tall enough to sit at the kitchen table, but you were too old for a high chair. And I remember those days. So that thick, they're probably, I don't know, 10 by 12 wide. The screen is the size of a calculator is today, or the screen's the size of probably a little bit bigger than like an iPhone, maybe an iPhone Plus screen. And they're going through this, and this model does this, and this model does this, and they're at $3,000 to $10,000 for these computers. Now, here's the funny part: is I remember building computers back then, tower computers, is they were functionally obsolete in 3 years. You were spending $3,000 or worse, $10,000 for something that was not going to be worth anything in 3, maybe 4 years. It was going to be too slow because technology was growing that fast. What's a laptop cost today? You can buy a decent Mac for probably less than $2,000, and those are the high-end computers. If you bought a no-name Windows or Chrome operating system computer, maybe $500, maybe $800 for what normal people use them for versus $3,000. How do we equate all of that? That's what we're dealing with inflation, is we don't have a good sense of how prices change. So many people I've talked to over the last 3 or 4 months, not just clients, just people on the street, people in the grocery store, friends, relatives, things of that nature. They talk about eggs, and there's no question, egg prices have more than doubled over the last year. And they talk about everything being twice as expensive, and it's not. Is we tend to hyper-focus. We get that emotional attachment to that item. So, for instance, eggs, and we get very attached to that. What they don't remember is gas prices have been coming down steadily over the last year and a half. And it's cheaper at the pump. It's cheaper just about everywhere. Of course, conversely, we've seen this winter, natural gas prices have skyrocketed. So heating your home, if you have natural gas, is very, very expensive. But your petroleum products are very inexpensive right now in comparison to the last couple of years, and they continue to fall. So you're trying to manage all of that. They don't all move at the same time. It's very difficult to get a sense of what inflation is really doing just by a gut feel, or even by that CPI. That CPI is going to give us those short-term changes, but as our habits change, is going to change that as well. Obviously, back in 1970, the cost of a television was a significant impact on our family income, and in 1990, buying a computer was a significant impact on our household income. And today, neither of those have any impact at all. There's 2 categories, though, that rose faster than the inflation rate. And I didn't do this on purpose. It was just as I was doing research from this Seek Publishing, as they gave me these categories. And when I started running the numbers, housing and education are the only 2 that grew significantly faster than the inflation rate. Now, housing, to some extent, housing's a big deal. Is as you utilize the resources. The lumber we use today is very different from the lumber we used 80 years ago. And we have to develop that, and it costs more. It's coming from further away, and all of that. There's going to be a cost increase. Plus, there's a greater demand for housing in the United States than there was in 1945. That greater demand is going to increase things. But one of the interesting things that the government did back in, it's got to be the late 90s, is they made a change to how much house you can afford. And they've made changes to it on an ongoing basis since. When I bought my house in 1984, so when I applied for my mortgage in 1993, because we had built our house, we had certain ratios that we had to fall under. So our principal, interest, taxes, and insurance had to be no greater than 24%. I think it was 23. I'm going to use 24 percent of our gross income. And all other debt plus those 4 numbers could be no more than, I think it was 29. It might have been 28, but I'll use 29% of our gross income. All right. That was the ratio at the time. And when I look today and I looked this up just last week, the ratios are 28% of your gross income can be used for principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, and 36 on those numbers plus all other debt. And that frightens the pants off of me. I ran some quick numbers and I said, okay, if somebody makes $100,000 a year and takes out the maximum mortgage allowed by all of these calculations and has all of this other debt, usually it's student loan debt for these people. What does their situation look like making $100,000 a year, which is higher than the average salary, average income of a family, of a household in the United States? I also assumed they were responsible enough to put 10% away in their 401k. Maybe they won't, but I'm going to say they're responsible to put 10% away in their 401k. So they put about $10,000 away in that because they want to actually retire someday. They paid about $19,000 in taxes. They paid $36,000 in principal, interest, taxes, insurance, car loan, credit card, and student loan. And they were left with $3,000 a month to run the household. And I scratch my head and I think, but how? How are you going to run the household on $3,000 a month? Doctor's bills, gas for the car, electricity, repairs, going on vacation, any of those things. All of those things cost a lot of money. And boy, you have to be really good at planning your expenses. And what I also looked is when we changed the ratios from 24-29 to 28-36, you can buy 20% more house in terms of cost. You'd like to think that we buy 20% more house today than we did in 1992 or 94 rather. I don't think we do. Is the expectation was Congress kind of change the rules for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two quasi-government organizations that are the ultimate lenders of the money that is used to pay for your house. The intention was we can get more people to buy a house, and that's good for America. And the reality is the price of houses rose by about 20% more than it should have, just because there was excess money around there. The intention was we're going to help people. And the reality was all of the help just went in somebody else's pocket. And that's frustrating. Same thing happened on the education side. Is back in the early 80s, the federal government made a policy decision. We were going to reduce the amount of grants given to students for education. And we're going to increase the amount of loans because we can loan a whole lot more money than we can grant money, because we're just covering interest and they'll pay it back. So we can affect change to a lot more people. And the logic was, if you can afford $10,000 and tuition costs $15,000, we're going to give you $5,000 and now you can afford the $15,000 tuition and your $10,000 a year ability to pay. That's not what happened. Is the cost of education, as we've seen, up 6.4% of the last 80 years, most of that being in the last 50. The cost of education rose significantly faster than the inflation rate, because for every dollar that was loaned out, the schools found something they were going to spend that money on and just increased the cost of education. There's more money available. There's more money growing around. We can increase it, and we can increase tuition for our staff. We can increase staff. You look at the support staff today versus 40 or 50 years ago, it's super massively bloated at this point. There's a lot of building going on, or has been going on, and they built all these great buildings and things like that. And the education isn't any better, but it's not $420 for Harvard anymore. It's $60,000 for Harvard. It's super massively large. Again, the intention was the government said, we're going to help. And I go back to I don't believe this is about every government program, but I still love the President Ronald Reagan quote, the 9 scariest words in the English language. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Definitely what happened is the government's intention, Congress's intention, and Congress is not filled with economists. They're filled with people that can get elected to Congress. That's their their forte. That's what they're good at, is getting elected to Congress. That's about it. And they're the ones creating the laws. So they stepped in and they thought they were helping, and they weren't helping. What we need is we need help like our dad used to help us, is, oh, you broke that? You're gonna have to save up to buy it again, as opposed to just enabling people and thinking that we're helping when we're actually we end up lining somebody else's pockets, and that's the terrible thing. So I apologize for that rant. I was dumbfounded that those two categories were the only categories that rose significantly higher than the inflation rate. I wanted to kind of address both of them. But what have we learned looking at all of this? Prices are going to go up. I know we had 20 years of effectively zero inflation. It seemed like zero. It was probably 1.5%, 2%, but it was so low. It was imperceivable. We're going to have to factor that in the future. Expect prices to cost more next year. Expect items to cost more next year. Expect prices to go up next year. Inflation isn't what you think. It doesn't move in a straight line. Different things go up and down at different times, especially like energy. Like we talked about, the gasoline costs have come down over the last year or so. That happens. That is going to happen. Other things are going to get cheaper and more expensive at different times. We can't just focus on one thing and assume it's everything. It's kind of like the eggs versus bananas. Bananas, I looked it up today. They were 49 cents a pound. So they've gone up. I thought they were 39 cents a pound. They're 49 cents a pound. Do you know, bananas are the number one eaten fruit in America. Do you know why? I think I know why. This is going to be one of Dennis's just mass prediction. When I was growing up, my mother would buy at this time of year, and I'm having mandarins now, is I can get these big bags of mandarins for like $6. And I'm so happy. I got a couple every night, trying to be healthy. When I was a kid, we got these huge navel oranges. I think they were navel oranges because the Navy rejected them, because you get a dozen of them and you need 11 of them, and they were horrific. There was no way to tell. And they got one that was okay, one that was good. And I couldn't understand it. And I was of the generation that there was a orange in the bottom of your stocking. If you're over probably the age of 50, definitely if you're over the age of 60, you remember this. There was orange at the bottom of your stocking, because it goes back to the time in the 1940s and things like that, where citrus fruit was so rare that you might only get it once a year. And that was at Christmas. And that was a big deal. And I think of those 1970s oranges and I go, what a disappointing gift that you open this orange and you taste it and it's bitter and it's awful. I've had apples. You go to the store and these apples look beautiful and you bring them home and one's okay and the rest are like, meh. Or the whole thing is like, meh. You don't know. At least grapes, you could steal a grape or two and tell if the grapes are actually halfway decent to eat. But bananas, you can look at a banana and based on the color and how many spots it has, you know exactly what it's going to taste like. Exactly what it's going to taste like. Because it's not a convenient piece of fruit. It's fairly fragile. You got to worry about bruising. If you take it with you, you've got to do something with that stupid peel. Versus most of the fruit, like if you brought like blueberries, you just eat the blueberries and they're gone. That's it. But you're stuck with this greasy peel. You don't know what to do with. Why do we eat them? Is the consistency. Is that fruit is going to taste exactly the same no matter which one you eat, because they're all genetically identical and they all taste exactly the same. And that's why we eat them. And they're 49 cents a pound, which is unheard of. They used to be 39 cents a pound. I remember when they were 29 cents a pound. I don't remember they were 9 cents a pound, which doesn't even register as possible in this world, that somebody for 9 cents a pound were able to bring bananas into this country. But you look at bananas versus eggs. Well, bananas haven't gone up that much in price. Eggs have gone up by a ton. And we need to balance those two items out, that not everything goes up at the same rate. Not everything goes up by the same amount or at the same time. So we need to be aware of that. But the real takeaway, and I guess there is a takeaway to this, is you need to be careful and factor in inflation when doing your retirement projections. Because if you look at your retirement situation, you're getting close to retirement, you say, oh, between Social Security and my spouse's municipal pension, and I think I can get X percent off my portfolio, and I've got some money in a CD that I can peel the interest off of that. I'm going to be break even that first year. I'm going to bring in as much money as I brought in when I was working. I'm going to be all set. You're in trouble. You are in big, big trouble because inflation is going to attack that income over time because you're going to need more and more income as you get into retirement, just because things get more expensive. If you're planning on just barely breaking even that first year in retirement, you might be in trouble. You need to have excess to build in some inflation fighting later on, because a municipal pension, for the most part, or even a corporate pension, is not going to see any inflation increases or very minimal. Social Security is going to see some, but they're not quite tied to the CPI, number one. And number two is, in about 5 years, they're going to make radical changes to Social Security. And likely one of the changes they're going to make is reducing the COLA on Social Security, cost of living increase. If you have money from, you're living off of interest, well, interest isn't going to go up. It's the same. It comes in the same as if you're getting $5,000 a year in interest on, say, CDs or a bond or something like that. It's always going to stay $5,000. It's not going to grow to 6 or 7 or 8 unless you reinvest that money. If you're spending it, it's going to stay flat. And if you have all of these items that are flat or near flat, over time, it's going to be harder and harder for you to live. And you're not going to realize this until 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10 years into retirement. You want to make sure you're plugged in on this. If you do have questions on that, I encourage you to reach out. I don't want to take up too much more of time. I'm already over 30 minutes. Thank you for your time. Again, if you have questions on inflation or how it might affect your situation, reach out, jump down in the comments in the show notes section, and connect with us either on social media or via our website. If you have ideas about future shows, please feel free. Throw out those comments. I'm always interested. Make sure you rate, like, and subscribe us as necessary. And I think that's it for today. Stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Remember, the views expressed are not necessarily those of Successful Money Strategies. All content is for educational purposes only and should not be construed as an endorsement of any third party or their views, or as a solicitation or offer to sell securities or provide investment, tax, legal, or consulting services. We believe the information presented to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed for accuracy or completeness. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Hypothetical returns do not reflect actual trading and may not be indicative of the performance of any specific investment. Always consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Additional information, including management fees and expenses, is provided on our Form ADV Part 2, available upon request, or at the SEC's Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website, https://advisorinfo.sec.gov.